So imagine you step into a leadership role of a struggling organization.
Right, like a legacy company or something.
Yeah, a legacy company that's been losing market share for years, or maybe, just a local community group where the attendance has completely dwindled.
Sure.
Your first instinct is likely to call this massive all-hands meeting. You plan to stand up there, cast this brilliant, highly energized vision for the future, and you just expect everyone in the room to catch fire with your enthusiasm.
Because you assume your passion will be contagious.
Precisely. But Charles Haddon Spurgeon, who was one of the most effective leaders of the 19th century, would look at that strategy and tell you that it's a guaranteed recipe for failure.
Which is pretty jarring to hear.
It is. So welcome to Reformed Thinking. I'm so glad you are joining us today. We're taking a deep dive into an unvarnished, almost shockingly realistic manual on human nature and organizational leadership.
Yeah, we are looking way past the polished biographies of historical figures. The ones where every victory seems grand and every follower seems so noble.
Right, we're getting into the raw reality of weeds, friction, and, well, sheer exhaustion.
And specifically, we are looking at an excerpt from Spurgeon's work called The Soul Winner. We are focusing on the chapter titled, How to Induce Our People to Win Souls.
Which is such a great title.
It really is. And Spurgeon, he doesn't offer a sanitized or romanticized view of ministry or leadership here. He is writing to young leaders who are totally fired up, and his very first move is to just lower their expectations to the absolute floor.
Just crush them right out of the gate.
Basically, yeah. He tells them to anticipate coldness, laziness, and active resistance from the very people they are trying to lead.
Which is a wild way to teach leadership.
It is, but it's rooted in this highly accurate sociology of human behavior, and of course, a robust theology of human depravity. So our mission for this deep dive is to investigate how a leader actually takes a disparate, apathetic group of individuals and cultivates them into an active, unified force.
Moving from just one person doing all the heavy lifting to building a total ecosystem of action.
He's spot on.
And that shift really begins with a very specific agricultural metaphor. If you are listening to this and you lead any kind of group, you have likely felt that heavy burden of having to do everything yourself.
Oh, absolutely.
So Spurgeon contrasts what he calls the single sower with the spiritual farmer. A single sower takes a basket of seed, walks out into the field, and scatters it with their own hands.
They do it all.
Yeah, if a program needs to be run, they run it. If a conversation needs to happen, they have it. But a spiritual farmer manages a massive acreage. They don't sow every single inch of the land themselves.
Right, because they have servants and helpers and laborers. The farmer directs the work, equipping others to do the actual sowing.
And making that transition, going from being the single sower to becoming the spiritual farmer, that is arguably the most difficult hurdle in any form of leadership.
It's the hurdle of scale and multiplication, really. Spurgeon tells these young leaders that they cannot expect a fully functioning spiritual farm to just appear overnight. He warns them, he says, don't expect in your first year the result that is the reward of 20 years of continuous toil in one place.
Which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and he uses this imagery of a new driver taking the reins of a horse carriage. He notes that it's a wonderful blessing if the horses don't know they have a new driver.
Meaning things are running smoothly.
Yeah, if you inherit an organization that has been well tended for decades, you should count your blessings.
Right.
But then he immediately pivots to the far more likely scenario, which is that you will inherit a ruined or neglected field.
A total mess.
A total mess. You'll inherit a plot covered with nettles, full of stones, weeds, thorns, all of it. And the biggest mistake a young leader can make in that environment is to act like a veteran.
Oh, man.
Spurgeon calls it a foolish affectation when a young person tries to speak with the seasoned authority of someone who has been a father among the people for 30 years.
I see this exact dynamic play out in the modern corporate world all the time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, think about a junior employee who gets hired at a legacy company. They come in fresh out of business school, full of the latest management theories, and on day one, they try to act like the CEO.
Oh, right.
They expect immediate institutional loyalty. They expect the veterans in the office, the people who've been there for 20 years, to just fall in line with their grand vision.
But they haven't earned it.
Exactly. That junior employee hasn't bled with the team. They haven't put in the decades of steady plodding required to build actual trust. So Spurgeon is pointing out that trying to fake seasoned authority just makes you look ridiculous to the people you're trying to lead.
You can't demand respect, it has to be accrued.
Right, it has to be earned over time.
And this touches on a really crucial theological concept regarding providence and time. God works through means, and one of those means is the slow, deliberate passage of time.
Because time is the mechanism that builds trust and proves character.
Yes. Spurgeon illustrates this by pointing to John Angel James at Cars Lane Chapel in Birmingham. That specific location was not famous or highly populated before James arrived.
He didn't just walk into a megachurch.
No, not at all. And James didn't find instant success. He just plodded on, steadily preaching the gospel and doing the hard work for years. Eventually, over a long period of consistent faithfulness, he drew a core group of helpers around him.
So there's a requirement for immense patience when you commit to working a hard field.
Immense patience.
But, Spurgeon's advice to the eager young leader feels completely counterintuitive to our modern sensibilities.
How so?
Well, he essentially says that you should anticipate having to do the work entirely by yourself at the beginning. He tells them to expect no assistance at first and to just tramp up and down the field alone.
Yeah, that's a tough pill to swallow.
Right. And so I need to ask about the psychological toll of that advice. If you tell a young, zealous leader to expect zero help and to shoulder the entire burden of the organization alone, aren't you guaranteeing intense burnout?
That's a fair question.
It seems like a recipe for a complete physical and mental crash before a team can ever even be formed.
It's a very natural concern, but Spurgeon is actually managing expectations to prevent a much more dangerous kind of burnout.
Which is?
Emotional disillusionment. The fastest way to burn out in leadership is to expect everyone around you to match your white-hot intensity, and then you just crash into despair when they fail to do so.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
By telling the young leader to expect no help, Spurgeon is shielding them from the bitterness that destroys so many careers. You tramp up and down the field alone, but you do it while looking to the Lord of the harvest.
You aren't relying on the congregation's energy to sustain you?
Exactly. You are relying on divine provision. It's a protective measure for the leader's soul.
That mentality sits in stark opposition to a culture that demands instant results and viral growth. We want our businesses to double in revenue in 6 months. We want our local churches to overflow with new members immediately.
And if that doesn't happen,
We assume the strategy is broken and we need to pivot. But Spurgeon addresses this impatience with a striking phrase. He says, "Try and whistle for the wind and see if it will come."
which is such a great visual.
Yeah, you can't force a genuine shift in an organization's culture just by whistling for it. You can't manufacture a genuine movement.
He reinforces that point by referencing the biblical account of Elijah praying for rain. Following a massive multi-year drought, Elijah goes up to Mount Carmel to pray. He doesn't offer a single prayer and immediately receive a thunderstorm.
Right, he prays, and then he sends his servant to look at the sky.
And the servant sees absolutely nothing. Elijah repeats this process 7 times. He has to wait for the small cloud to finally appear on the horizon.
Wow.
Spurgeon is teaching that genuine shifts in organizational health don't answer to human timelines. You plod on, you plead on, and in due time, the blessing comes. The leader must remain steady while the invisible work is happening.
So we have established the need for patience while tramping the field alone. But eventually, you want to start turning that neglected field into a functioning farm.
You want to ignite a fire in the people around you.
Yes. And this brings us to Spurgeon's vivid depiction of trying to motivate a specific, difficult demographic within an organization. He describes the experience of going to the principal deacon, someone who has been a fixture in the church for decades.
The guy who's seen it all?
Exactly. The young leader approaches this veteran at a white heat of enthusiasm, ready to change the world. And the deacon is, quote, cold as steel.
Yeah.
Spurgeon compares the interaction to dipping a piece of white-hot iron into a pail of water.
It's a brilliant, highly tactile image. The white-hot iron hisses, it loses all its heat, and it just turns black. The old deacon looks at the young, zealous leader and says, "I've seen others as hot as you. They've cooled down. You will too."
The wet blanket of institutional memory.
Perfectly said. But what is crucial to note is that Spurgeon doesn't call this deacon an evil person. He acknowledges that the deacon is likely a very good man, but he is old, and you cannot put young heads on old shoulders.
Right. The deacon has seen fads come and go, so his default posture is skepticism.
Yeah.
And then Spurgeon mentions trying to motivate the young people, but finds they are backward, retiring, and tend to fly off at a tangent.
They lack focus and discipline.
So, The leader is faced with a completely unenthusiastic environment. How do you actually start a fire in a room full of damp wood?
Well, Spurgeon lays out two distinct methods. Method A is what we might call the top-down, macro-level
That's
approach.
right.
You call the entire organization together, you stand at the front, deliver your most passionate speech, cast the vision, and plead for everyone to get on board all at once. You ask for a corporate outpouring of energy.
And Spurgeon admits that this macro-level approach might work. It might be like setting a light to dry fuel, resulting in a sudden, widespread awakening, similar to the day of Pentecost.
But his pragmatism immediately shines through. He adds a massive caveat, warning that absolutely nothing might come of it. The large gathering might end with a whimper rather than a bang.
I find his description of that failure absolutely hilarious and deeply relatable.
Oh, it's so funny.
He says, the people will sit there, listen politely to your big, passionate speech, and then say to themselves, it is a very nice meeting, and our pastor expects a good deal of us, and we all wish he may get it.
And then they go home and do absolutely nothing differently.
It's the polite applause of total apathy.
This reveals a masterful understanding of human sociology. If the macro culture of an organization is dead, calling a macro-level meeting won't revive it. The sheer volume of apathy in the room will absorb the leader's speech like a sponge.
Because when everyone is responsible, no one is responsible.
Yes, because the large group dynamic diffuses accountability, Spurgeon introduces Method B. This is the grassroots approach. If you cannot light the entire pile of damp wood at once, you must pull aside one or two specific pieces and deal with them privately.
He advises the leader to look for a choice young man or a gracious matron who seems slightly more engaged than the rest. You don't announce this selection to the church. You don't make a big public display.
You keep it quiet.
Yeah, you privately invite them to your home for prayer. You gradually increase the number to 2 or 3. You start creating a microculture.
Right.
This reminds me perfectly of how a tech startup launches a closed beta test.
Oh, that's an interesting connection.
You don't release a brand new, somewhat fragile piece of software to the whole unenthusiastic public. If you do, they will find one bug, decide they hate it, and leave a terrible review.
Sure, yeah.
Instead, you give the software to a tiny group of super users. These are people you know are highly engaged and forgiving. You let them work out the bugs, you let them catch the vision, and they become the ones who generate the hype. They spread the fire to the rest of the market.
That analogy fits perfectly. You are building critical mass from the inside out, rather than trying to impose it from the top down. And to illustrate this, Spurgeon uses an analogy that would have been quite shocking to a Victorian audience. He discusses the most effectual way to burn a house down.
Casual arson.
Very casual. He says you could pour petroleum down the middle of it and set it on fire, which is a direct historical reference to the radicals in Paris during the Commune. Alternatively, you could light the house at the 4 corners.
And he cheekily adds that he likes to burn churches rather than houses, because churches don't burn down, they burn up.
He really had a way with words.
Let's examine a very specific and provocative phrase he uses in this section. He tells these young leaders to turn their small, private prayer group into a secret society, a band of celestial Fenians, to set the whole church on fire.
Yes.
For context, the Fenians were a real-world, radical, underground Irish political movement in the 19th century. They were revolutionaries. They were subversive.
Very subversive.
Is Spurgeon actually advocating for a subversive, rogue element to operate within the local church? That sounds incredibly dangerous for organizational unity. It sounds like he is telling leaders to form a faction.
Well, it's a deliberately provocative term designed for shock value. Spurgeon is trying to wake up his students to the severity of the situation. He isn't advocating for theological rebellion or a malicious division within the church.
Okay, so what is he advocating for?
He is advocating for holy subversion against the dominant culture of apathy. He explicitly warns that if you form the zealous inner circle, the devil will not like it, and resistance will arise to try and break up the union.
So friction is guaranteed.
That friction is exactly what they should expect and even desire. He wants war to the knife between the church and the world's habits of laziness. The apathy in the church is the true enemy here.
I see.
By creating this inner circle of prayerful, zealous people, you are forming a resistance movement against the status quo of dead religion. You are intentionally disrupting the peace of the graveyard.
The peace of the graveyard. That is intense. And he grounds this radical idea beautifully in the biblical imagery of the burning bush from the book of Exodus. The bush that burns with fire but is not consumed.
Yes, that's key.
He explains that if the fire is merely human adrenaline, it burns up the bush very quickly. You see these young, zealous people who run so fast at the beginning of their careers that they quickly become like broken-winded horses.
It's sad to watch.
It is a pitiable sight to watch someone completely exhaust themselves because they are running on their own energy. The zeal required to change an organization has to be sustained by something outside of human effort.
And that need for external sustenance brings us directly to the mechanism of how these celestial Fenians keep the fire burning without destroying themselves. How do they maintain that heat week after week?
Right.
This leads into Spurgeon's intense focus on the engine room of the church.
Which is the midweek prayer meeting. Spurgeon targets this specific gathering as the true business evening of the week. Not the Sunday morning sermon, which is what most people assume is the main event, but the prayer meeting.
Yes.
And he goes after the lazy ministers in the London suburbs with absolutely no mercy, completely dismantling their approach to the weekly schedule.
He paints a very dreary, realistic picture of the typical suburban church. The minister assumes he can't get his congregation to come out for both a prayer meeting and a teaching lecture during the week, so he decides to combine them into 1 hour.
The dreaded combined meeting.
Yeah, and Spurgeon mocks this compromise relentlessly. He says the lazy man gives a short, uninspired address, calls it a combined meeting, and ends up being neither fish, flesh, fowl, nor good red herring.
Wow.
It's a watered-down, confused event that achieves nothing. Consequently, the minister soon gives it up entirely because the people stop attending, correctly assessing that the meeting is useless.
The meeting is useless because it has become a passive ritual rather than an active engine. Spurgeon insists on making the prayer meeting highly engaging, calling it the best service between the Sabbaths.
Yes, the best service.
And here we encounter perhaps the most shocking piece of pastoral advice in the entire text. He addresses the very common problem of people who pray too long in public.
Oh, this part is brilliant.
He tells the leader, "Do not hesitate to tell good Mr. Snooks that he shall not pray for 25 minutes. Earnestly entreat him to cut it short, and if he does not, stop him."
Stop him right in the middle of it. And Spurgeon then provides an analogy that makes modern sensibilities wince. He compares the act of stopping a long-winded prayer to stopping a man from cutting his wife's throat.
I need to push back on this, or at least ask for a deep explanation.
Go for it.
In almost every religious tradition, interrupting someone while they are praying out loud is considered the height of irreverence. It's a sacred cow. When someone closes their eyes and begins speaking to God, the social contract dictates that you just endure it until they say amen, no matter how long it takes.
Even 25 minutes.
Exactly. How does Spurgeon justify such a seemingly harsh, violent analogy, and how do we reconcile that ruthlessness with his broader reputation for very tender, loving, pastoral care?
To understand this, we have to look at the mechanics of what Spurgeon believes the church actually is. The justification becomes clear when you realize he loves the collective church almost as much as he loves his own wife.
Okay.
To Spurgeon, a dull, droning, 25-minute public prayer is not an act of genuine piety. It is an act of spiritual murder.
Spiritual murder.
It mechanically kills the vitality of the room. It causes the minds of the young people to wander. It extinguishes the energy of the celestial Fenians. It quenches the Holy Spirit.
Because everyone is just zoning out.
Exactly. He views the collective zeal of the congregation as infinitely more precious than the fragile ego of Mr. Snooks. This advice shows a remarkable pastoral spine.
He's acting as a protector.
Yes, the leader is acting as a protector. You are protecting the flock from the boredom that leads directly to spiritual death. He tells the long-winded man to finish his lengthy prayer at home in private. Public prayer must serve the public good, and if it fails to do so, it must be stopped.
That is a massive paradigm shift for anyone who leads meetings. You are guarding the energy of the room. Because he views the prayer meeting as the literal source of strength, he demands radical flexibility to make it happen.
Radical flexibility is right.
He says if the people seem heavy and tired, change the format immediately. Have them sing Moody and Sankey hymns, which were the catchy, upbeat, revivalist tunes of his day, to wake them up.
Just jolt them awake.
Yeah. And when they learn all those tunes, switch back to the regular, more solemn hymn book, keep them on their toes. But his radical flexibility goes far beyond just changing the music. It extends to the very structure of the schedule.
Oh, yeah. He tells his students to abandon predictable time slots if they are not working. Hold a meeting in the country at 4:30 in the morning or 6:00 in the morning to accommodate agricultural workers before they go to the fields.
Which makes practical sense.
Hold a meeting at midnight Try 1.00 a.m., 2.0 a.m., or 3.0 a.m.
I was trying to envision what a modern equivalent of this would look like. Today, everything in our corporate and religious life is thoroughly sanitized and locked into predictable calendar invites.
Right, Sunday at 10 a.m., Wednesday at 7 p.m.
It never changes. But Spurgeon says if they won't come to the church building, take the meeting to them. Tell a family you are having a prayer meeting in their parlor.
Just invite yourself over.
Yeah, and if the wife is worried about the house being messy or the carpet getting dirty, go out into the coach house or stand in the garden. Go trudge down the street with 50 people and hold a prayer meeting in the open air.
It's relentless.
He references the women in America who fought the liquor sellers by literally praying them out of the traffic, kneeling on the sidewalks outside the saloons. This approach completely breaks the script of polite, contained religion.
It's the sheer relentless creativity born out of desperation for spiritual vitality. He says, if we cannot stir the people without doing extraordinary things, in the name of all that is good and great, let us do extraordinary things.
The method doesn't matter as much as the outcome.
The specific method or time slot is entirely secondary to the ultimate goal. The goal is to get the people praying together.
Right.
When we talk about the ordinary means of grace, things like the preaching of the word, the sacraments, and corporate prayer, we need to understand how they function mechanically. Think of it like setting a broken bone in a medical context.
Okay, I like this analogy.
A doctor cannot force a bone to heal through sheer willpower or a motivational speech. The healing is a biological process that occurs naturally, provided the conditions are right.
So what does the doctor do?
The doctor's job is to set the bone in a cast. The cast is the means. It holds everything in the correct position so the body's natural biology can do the work.
Ah, I see.
In a spiritual context, corporate prayer is the cast. It aligns the congregation's posture. It holds them in a state of dependence and expectation, creating the conditions where the Holy Spirit operates. You cannot have a zealous church with a slow coach minister who refuses to apply the cast.
A slow coach minister. I love the 19th century Burns.
They're the best.
That concept of the congregation's posture segues directly into the next phase of our analysis. Once you have this fire burning, once the engine room of prayer is running and the cast is set, what do the people actually do?
Right. What's the next step?
Spurgeon says the pastor cannot reach everyone alone from the pulpit. The spiritual farmer needs laborers. He calls for a band of what he terms sharpshooters.
The sharpshooters. These are individual church members who are trained to pick people out of the crowd. They don't wait for the pastor to make a general appeal. They engage in targeted one-on-one interactions.
And Spurgeon calls this practice buttonholing people.
Yes, buttonholing.
The imagery he uses to describe buttonholing is both hilarious and slightly alarming. He references the biblical story of Absalom, King David's rebellious son.
Oh, boy.
During a battle, Absalom was riding his mule under a great oak tree, and his thick hair got caught in the boughs. The mule kept going, and Absalom was left hanging there, completely trapped and unable to escape.
Just suspended in the tree.
Spurgeon looks at that story and says to his congregation, "It is pretty close work when you hold a friend by a lock of his hair or by his coat button. Absalom did not find it easy to get away. So try to get at close quarters with sinners."
To a modern listener, that sounds like a massive violation of personal space.
It sounds incredibly aggressive. Calling a church member a hunting dog who waylays visitors in the aisles. I mean, is there a danger here of treating visitors like targets rather than actual human beings? It conjures images of high-pressure sales tactics where the customer feels cornered and manipulated.
That is a very valid concern for today's context, where high-pressure tactics are widely distrusted. However, we have to look at how Spurgeon qualifies the instruction immediately after the Absalom reference.
What does he say?
He says, "Talk gently to them until you have whispered them into the kingdom of heaven."
Ah, whispered them.
Right. The intent isn't a loud, aggressive sales pitch. The intent is highly intentional, deeply personal pastoral care that is distributed among the congregation. He wants members who ensure no one leaves the building without a personal invitation to know Christ. He wants to turn the church into an active Salvation Army rather than a passive audience.
And when the congregation is acting like that, handling the ground game and the personal interactions, the role of the preacher completely changes.
It shifts dramatically.
He contrasts what he calls flummery with the clear orders of a commander-in-chief. Flummery refers to fine, flashy, thunder and lightning sermons designed to show off the speaker's intellect.
All style, no substance.
Right. Spurgeon points out that people who are actually out there working in the harvest field do not want thunder and lightning. They don't need a theatrical performance. They want to rest under a tree, wipe the sweat from their foreheads, get clear instructions, and get back to work.
They want practical direction.
Exactly. The sermon should be short, sweet, and direct. There are the enemy. Do not let me know where they are tomorrow.
This shift in the preacher's role relies entirely on one of the most vital concepts in the text, the atmosphere of dew.
Dew, like morning condensation.
Yes. Spurgeon asserts that we are sure to get the blessing we are seeking when the whole atmosphere of the room is favorable to soul winning. To explain this mechanically, he shares a story about an Irishman's theory on agricultural irrigation.
Okay.
The Irishman observed that watering plants while the sun is shining brightly is not very effective and might even scorch the leaves, turning them yellow and killing the plant.
Because the sun just bakes the water right on the leaves.
Precisely. But when it rains, the environment changes. There are clouds blocking the sun. The sky is shaded. The humidity rises. The general feeling of everything is damp all around.
The atmosphere is primed to receive the moisture.
Any experienced gardener knows you water in the evening when the sun is off the plants and the air is cooler. The favorable influence in the atmosphere allows the moisture to actually penetrate the soil and benefit the root system.
That makes total sense biologically.
And Spurgeon applies this biological reality directly to spiritual things. When a minister preaches in a room full of people who have been praying for hours, people who are deeply expecting God to move, that room is full of spiritual dew.
He compares it to Mount Gilboa, which David cursed to have no dew or rain, contrasting it with the day of Pentecost, which possessed a completely saturated, highly charged spiritual atmosphere.
Exactly.
I was thinking about this concept of dew and how to frame it outside of agriculture to really grasp the mechanics of it. Think about the science of acoustics.
Yeah, okay, let's hear it.
If you take a master violinist and have them play a beautiful, complex solo in a small room lined with sound-absorbing foam, the performance falls flat. It sounds dead and muted.
Because there's no reverberation.
Right. The environment actively works against the music, absorbing the vibrations before they can reach the listener's ear. But if you take that same violinist playing the exact same notes on the exact same instrument and put them in a massive, ancient stone cathedral, the sound resonates.
It fills the whole space.
It swells. It carries to the very back row. The congregation's expectation, their prayerful readiness, is that stone cathedral.
That's a fantastic way to put it.
Spurgeon says he often feels no credit is due to him when he preaches, because he steps into a room where people are sitting with their mouths open, practically demanding a blessing.
He describes the sensation by saying, when a man is put on a horse that runs away with him, he must ride. The momentum of the praying congregation carries the preacher along.
That's incredible.
We see the cooperative work between the Holy Spirit and the local church here. You cannot force conversions. Regeneration is solely an act of God. But God uses the atmosphere, primed by corporate prayer, as the ordinary environment for that miracle to occur.
Right. The environment facilitates the work.
Spurgeon explicitly mentions the Apostle Peter's sermon at Pentecost. It was a great, plain sermon, but the massive number of conversions weren't the result of the words alone. The disciples had been praying together in one place for days. The atmosphere was incredibly damp.
The heavenly electricity was concentrated at that specific spot.
Yes.
And because that atmosphere is so crucial, he expects the church members to share in a divine dissatisfaction if the dew is ever missing. He mentions a specific deacon who complained to him after a communion service.
Oh, this is a great story.
They'd only taken in 14 new members that month, and the deacon looked at him and said, "Governor, this won't pay."
Governor, this won't pay.
They were used to seeing 40 or 50 new members a month. Now, many modern pastors would be deeply offended by that comment, thinking the deacon was being ungrateful for the 14.
Most would be.
But Spurgeon loved it. He praised that holy discontent. That specific environment of high expectation is what creates the hunting dogs.
Right.
He mentions a friend he explicitly calls his hunting dog, a man who waylays inquirers and brings them directly to the pastor for counseling. This man keeps a Bible ready, with targeted text pasted inside the cover in bold type.
He has texts like, "The Son of Man is come to seek and to save that which was lost," or, "Him that cometh to me I will in no wise cast out, ready at a moment's notice."
Just locked and loaded.
Having those texts physically prepared shows that evangelism is both a sovereign divine act and a highly intentional human interaction. Spurgeon quotes an observer who evaluated a series of special services and noted that the successful evangelist possessed a faculty for the precipitation of decision.
Precipitation of decision. That's a weighty phrase.
They didn't just present information, they helped bring the internal wrestling to a head. The atmosphere of dew makes the precipitation possible, but the hunting dogs are the human instruments walking people across the finish line.
Let's bring this back to reality for a second. We have painted this beautiful, highly functioning picture of the stone cathedral acoustics, the spiritual farm operating under heavy dew, and the hunting dogs successfully precipitating decisions.
The ideal scenario.
But Spurgeon is a realist, and he knows that is not where most leaders start, and it is certainly not what every environment looks like. This takes us to the final major theme of our discussion, dealing with hostile fields, tares, and pulling the horse.
This is where the rubber meets the road.
He shares this incredibly tense, uncomfortable anecdote about visiting a church that clearly did not want him there.
The church authorities had only invited him because of the financial benefit of the large crowds his name would draw. The church members themselves didn't expect a spiritual blessing, and consequently, they didn't receive one.
Only the visitors benefited.
Right, only the visitors from other churches benefited from the sermon. After the service concluded, Spurgeon walks into the vestry and finds the two deacons of the church standing on opposite sides of the mantelpiece.
That is a brilliant visual representation of division. They are standing as far apart from each other as the room will physically allow.
It's so petty.
Spurgeon looks at the situation, assesses the atmosphere, and asks them, "The church does not prosper, does it?" They both say no. And Spurgeon, possessing absolutely no filter, looks at them and says, "I should not think it would with such deacons."
It is stunning bluntness, just right to their faces.
The deacons are offended and ask if he knows anything specific against their character. He replies, "No, but I do not know anything in your favor."
Wow.
Because he couldn't reach the whole church through his sermon due to the dead atmosphere, he buttonholed the two leaders right there in the vestry.
And what was the result of that direct confrontation?
One deacon left the church in anger, and the other was irritated in the right way, stayed, and eventually helped improve the church. Following that story, Spurgeon gives us an analogy that perfectly captures the frustration of leadership. He says, dealing with this kind of internal resistance is hard enough under normal circumstances. It's like rowing a boat against the wind and the tide.
You are expending massive energy just to stay in one place.
But it's infinitely worse if you have a horse on the bank, pulling a rope, dragging your boat the opposite way. You are fighting the elements and active sabotage simultaneously.
And his advice for this situation?
Work away all the harder and pull the horse into the water.
Pull the horse into the water. It's a remarkable, highly aggressive strategy for dealing with entrenched institutional opposition.
If you are listening to this and you manage a team, maybe you are the head of a department at a massive corporation, you might be sweating a bit.
Definitely.
You're thinking, practically speaking, how do you do that? How do you pull a hostile leader, a horse on the bank, into the water without capsizing your own boat in the process? Isn't there a huge risk of splitting the congregation, destroying the team's morale, or triggering a massive HR crisis?
Let's look at the mechanics of this strategy to understand why it works. Spurgeon's approach is not to drop the oars, get out of the boat, and go fight the horse on the bank.
Oh, so you don't engage directly.
No, if you fight a toxic leader directly, you validate their influence. You turn the situation into a two-sided debate, elevating them to the status of a peer in the eyes of the organization.
Which is exactly what they want.
Exactly. His strategy is to row harder in the direction of truth and vitality. You overwhelm the resistance with positive momentum. He notes that it's actually preferable to work on the borders of the infernal lake, working with the worst, most acknowledged sinners in society, than to deal with dead, professing Christians inside the church.
He refers to these toxic insiders as tares.
Tares, yes.
That is a direct reference to the parable of Jesus, where an enemy sows weeds or tares among the wheat in a field. In the parable, the master's servants ask if they should pull up the weeds.
And the master says no.
Right, the master says no. Do not uproot the tares, lest you accidentally uproot the healthy wheat with them. You have to let them grow together until the harvest.
It's about patience again.
Spurgeon applies this agricultural parable directly to toxic church culture. He says, you have people in your organization with a name to live, but they are actually dead. They exert a baneful, suffocating influence on everything around them.
But we are largely powerless to cure the evil directly.
Because we can't possess perfect omniscience to know exactly who is a tare and who is just struggling, so we can't just kick everyone out.
Right. Given that limitation, what is his counterintuitive strategy?
You water the wheat.
Water the wheat.
Rather than engaging in endless church discipline, constant arguments, or political maneuvering to pull up the tares, you intentionally ignore the tares and pour all your resources, your best preaching, and your pastoral care into the healthy members.
You focus entirely on the celestial Finians.
Yes. You generate so much spiritual heat and vitality within that inner circle that the overall environment shifts.
He literally says that he has known ungodly men who have had the place made so hot for them that they have been glad to clear right out of the church.
They just leave on their own.
They walk away complaining, saying, "The preaching is too strong for us, and these people are too strict to suit us."
And Spurgeon's reaction to losing members. He says, "What a blessing. We didn't drive them away by force or legislation. The plain truth drove them away. Let them go and pray for them from a distance."
It reveals a robust, unshakable confidence in the truth.
It really does.
To understand why watering the wheat works, we have to look at the theological distinction between the visible church and the invisible church. The visible church, the people sitting in the pews on a Sunday morning, will always contain a mixture of true believers and hypocrites. The leader's job is not to play God, possessing perfect omniscience, and purge the membership rolls with absolute precision.
Because you'll inevitably pull up the wheat by mistake.
Precisely. The leader's job is to faithfully administer the means of grace, preaching the word and praying fervently, until the true believers are so nourished and active that the hypocrites find the atmosphere socially and spiritually unbearable.
So you don't capsize your boat fighting the horse on the bank.
No, you just row so faithfully and build so much momentum that the rope eventually snaps or the horse gets dragged into the water. The environment itself does the sorting.
That is such a strong synthesis of this entire excerpt, and it brings us to a clear conclusion. As we wrap up this deep dive, let's look at the massive paradigm shift we have investigated today.
It's a lot to take in.
Spurgeon completely dismantles the modern celebrity-driven idea of the solitary hero holding a microphone. The goal of a true leader is never to be the single sower doing all the work forever.
The goal is to become the patient spiritual farmer.
Right. It requires understanding the sociology of your group well enough to know when macro meetings will fail and when you need to launch a secret society of celestial Finians to spark a fire from the inside out.
And it requires the ruthless, unapologetic defense of corporate prayer.
Even if it means interrupting Mr. Snooks, so his 25-minute drone doesn't kill the energy of the room.
It involves cultivating the sharpshooters and the hunting dogs, the everyday members who are armed with scripture and ready to do the close quarters work of bringing people across the finish line.
It demands an understanding of the spiritual due, recognizing that the atmosphere is primed by collective expectation.
And finally, it requires the steady, confident strategy of watering the wheat until the tares are choked out by the sheer heat of the environment.
If you are listening to this right now, these principles apply directly to whatever field you are currently tramping. Whether you are walking into a broken corporate culture, trying to build a new team, trying to set a different tone in your family dynamic, or seeking to wake up a sleepy local congregation, the mechanics hold true.
Absolutely.
Cultivating that atmosphere of dew requires collective expectation. You cannot force the rain to fall on your own timeline, but you can gather the people, get the umbrellas ready, and look at the sky together.
And you must possess the patience to let time do its required work. The harvest of 20 years cannot be reaped in the first year.
So true.
You must be willing to tramp the field alone at first, shielding yourself from disillusionment by trusting the Lord of the harvest to sustain you when the people around you will not.
Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on as we close. We started this deep dive talking about Spurgeon's striking realism, his absolute refusal to give us a sanitized, pristine view of the people we work with.
He tells it like it is.
We so often assume that the biggest threat to our growth, our success, or our spiritual vitality is the hostile, secular world outside our doors. We think the enemy is always out there, actively fighting against us.
Sure, that's the default assumption.
But what if Spurgeon is right? What if the most dangerous obstacle to your organization's success is actually the cold, polite apathy sitting right next to you in the pew or across from you in the boardroom?
That's a heavy thought.
And, more pressingly, if you look at your own habits, your own level of zeal, and your own willingness to pray, how can you be absolutely certain you aren't the horse on the bank, pulling the rope the wrong way?
Ouch.
Yeah.